everyone, welcome to my channel, or if you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Amy, and today I'm going to show you the most comforting of comfort foods, the best ever chicken pot pie. I also one-upped my family recipe by making the pie crust from scratch for the very first time in my life. Trust me, this is way better than anything in the frozen food aisle. Stick around because you do not want to miss this. But first, we ran out of honey mustard dressing this week, so I had to make my own. This quick and easy honey mustard puts that store-bought stuff to shame. So let's make some dressing. This is so easy and quick to put together. It has such a nice tangy flavor. I started with 1 cup of mayonnaise. I'm using just regular mayo without any additional flavors added, like garlic mayo or spicy mayo. I don't want any additional flavors competing with the honey and mustard since they should be the stars of this show. I'm also doubling this recipe, but I will leave a link to the original recipe in the description box below. Next is our 2 different mustards. We want 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard and 4 tablespoons of just regular yellow mustard. You also don't have to be extremely rigid with the measurements with this. As long as it's roughly 2 Dijon and 4 regular yellow mustard, it'll be great. Next is 4 tablespoons of honey. And I'm putting mine into a separate little container because my honey is a little crystallized. While this really doesn't matter if I'm cooking with honey, I really don't want honey crystals in my dressing, so I sat this container in a bowl with some warm water for a few minutes so it would melt a little. If your honey is not crystallized, it can go straight into the bowl with everything else right away. The last ingredient is 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. You can use fresh squeezed lemon juice if you like, but I only had this little squeeze bottle on hand, so if you only have bottled juice, it'll work just fine. And then this just gets all stirred up together. As you can see, I doubled everything, but then I only put in a half tablespoon of lemon juice, so I added a little more mid-stir to get the full tablespoon for this double recipe. I don't know if it's just me, but I have noticed that the store-bought stuff lately just isn't cutting it flavor-wise for me. If I buy honey mustard at the store, dressing or dip, it has this weird, almost musty flavor, and it's almost bland. I don't know if it has to do with preservatives or extra ingredients like thickeners, or if it's just been sitting on the grocery shelf too long, and I promise I'm not putting on my tinfoil hat, but the more I make things at home, the more I just don't enjoy the pre-made stuff I used to buy at the store. And this comes together so quickly and tastes so much better that I can't justify buying this pre-made anymore. I am storing this in a mason jar, but you could use Tupperware, leftover spaghetti sauce jar, squeeze bottle, whatever you have. It'll stay good in the fridge for about 2 weeks. This is a little thinner than the standard store-bought dressing or dip, but we found that it actually coats better, and it's so flavorful that we don't actually need to dump in a whole bunch of dressing or scoop a ton of it to get enough flavor. We made salads to start, but this is also great as a dip for chicken, fresh veggies, even French fries. It is so tangy and so fresh with that nice honey sweetness. I really hope you try this. You will never ever go back. Now on to the big event. Let's make that chicken pot pie. But to start, I needed to face my fear and make a pie crust for the very first time, and I was actually kind of scared to try this. My mother-in-law sent me a recipe for a butter pie crust that she just loves and makes before any other pie crust. So let's overcome this fear and make a pie. Keep in mind that the measurements I'm giving here are for a single sheet of pie crust, so this needs to be doubled for the bottom and top crusts for this pie. To start, I need 10 tablespoons of butter. 2 of these I am grating up into a little container, and this needs to go straight into the freezer so these little butter shreds can get completely frozen. With that done, I cut the other 8 tablespoons or 1 full stick into cubes, about 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch thick. Since this is going to get blitzed up in the food processor, it isn't really necessary to be very picky. You just don't want the butter in big chunks. Now to the food processor. First I added 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour, a half tablespoon of sugar, and a half teaspoon of salt to the food processor. If I was using this pie crust for a sweet pie, I would add a full tablespoon of sugar, but since this pie is savory, I don't want the crust to taste sweet, so I cut the sugar in half. I put the lid on, and you can see me messing with it a little because this is probably the second time I've ever used this thing, so I'm just learning about using this tool as well. I pulsed this a few times just to mix the dry ingredients up. Next, I added in my cold butter cubes, and this needs to be pulsed until the mixture in there looks like a paste. I sped this up, but it still took less than a minute of pulsing the food processor to get this to the paste consistency. At that point, then add a half cup of flour and pulse this until the mixture looks sandy. It should not be holding together at this point, and it'll still feel pretty nice and dry. I dump this sandy mixture into a bowl, and make sure you're careful about those food processor blades. Those things are really, really sharp. Now we need to get the 2 tablespoons of butter that we put in the freezer. This gets added to the bowl, and then I just used my clean hands to toss the frozen butter just until it was coated. This I need to move quickly here because this butter will start softening really fast. Lastly, I'm adding my water. I started with 2 tablespoons, and this water needs to be ice cold so it doesn't start melting the almost crazy amount of butter we have in here. It can also help to use a spatula to mix the water to start, since the warmth from my hands will also start melting that butter, and that is the last thing we want because the butter is what makes it nice and flaky. So I mixed this up, and it still seemed a little dry, so I added 1 more tablespoon of water. At that point, it held together, but only just, so I was pretty sure it was ready. I patted the dough into a rough ball without working it much to avoid activating any gluten in the flour, wrapped it in plastic, and put it in the fridge to keep that butter nice and cold and solid. Unfortunately, I didn't get that on camera, but it will look sort of crumbly by itself. It'll hold together if you press some in your hand, but then it'll fall apart again pretty easy. While the pie crust is happily chilling in the fridge, I am going to get started on this pie filling. I'm using 2 boneless skinless chicken breasts for the filling. These also still have the tenderloins because we buy whole chickens and part them out ourselves at home since it saves a lot on our grocery bill. So the 2 chicken breasts with tenderloins will go into a pot of water, and I'm going to bring this to a boil, and then we'll boil this chicken until it can be shredded or diced. When the internal temperature of the chicken reaches 165 Fahrenheit, the meat will be good to shred or chop up. We like our meat shredded, and you can see here that it shreds very easily. It just falls right apart. If you prefer diced chicken though, just grab a knife, chop these into smallish pieces. With the chicken done, now I'm going to dice up a small to medium-sized potato. And here is where you can do this one of 2 ways. If I want to put this potato into the pie completely raw, then the potato needs to be chopped up very small. Like, the pieces should be about the same size as those little carrot cubes in a bag of frozen mixed vegetables, like a 1/4 inch little cubes. If you don't want the potatoes that small, you would want to add a little butter or oil to a pan, cut up your potato to the size you want, and cook them for a few minutes on the stove before putting them into the filling. They don't need to be fully cooked, just a quick par cook, like 5 minutes on the stove until they're about half done, and they'll be perfect in the end. But I cut mine up really nice and small, so I just put them in the pie uncooked and they came out just fine. And now we just combine everything. In a bowl, add 1 can of cream of chicken soup. I am using a store-bought can because I still have a few in my pantry, but if you make your own, just use the equivalent of a can. Add a half cup of half and half, if you have that, or milk if you don't. The only difference is that the sauce will not be quite as thick, but it'll still taste amazing if you just use regular milk. Whisk all this up, and you can see here that there are still little lumps of the soup in there. It doesn't have to be completely smooth at this point, you just don't want any large lumps of the condensed soup. Then come the spices, and these are very much whatever you want them to be to get the flavor that you want. My husband and I love smoked paprika, onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and pepper, and that's just our preference. But you could also make a more herby tasting kind of pie and add like rosemary, thyme, some oregano. You could also throw some cayenne in there if you want a little heat in your pie. And I also just measured these with my heart, but I'll put some actual measurements in the description. Just don't forget that the canned soup does already have some sodium in it, so I'm usually a little careful with how much additional salt I put in because I don't want my pie to be overly salty. Now we add 1.5 cups of frozen mixed vegetables, and I'm using a pretty traditional mix of corn, carrots, green beans, and peas. Next comes our potato pieces, and if you did par cook them, they do not need to be fully cold. It's okay if they're still pretty warm from the stove. I fold all this together with a spatula to make sure all the vegetables are mixed in. I want to make sure I mix everything nice and evenly because I don't want to have a bunch of liquid at the bottom. Last comes the chicken, and I add this by the handful until I'm happy with the consistency. We like our chicken pot pie to be absolutely stuffed to the gills, but if you prefer having a looser pie that's a little more wet and less full, then stop adding chicken when you're happy with that ratio of gravy to veggies and meat. If I don't use all the chicken, and sometimes I don't, I throw it in the fridge and I'll add it to a salad or make a chicken quesadilla with it, something fun. It definitely does not go to waste. This is how we like the filling to look. It's very, very hearty, but there is still plenty of gravy that the pie does not turn out dry in the end. Now that we have our filling ready, pull the pie crust out of the fridge and cut it in half. Or if you made each separately, then you should have 2 little patties. On a floured surface, roll out each half until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick, and you want to work somewhat quickly so this crust stays cold. Take one and fit it into your pie pan. Then you're going to pour all of that amazing pie filling into the pan. And at this point, yes, it will look like it's way too much filling, but just keep going. Gently work the filling into the edges so there's no air pockets in there, and smooth it all out on top. Just do your best to keep from getting filling on the edges, or else it'll have trouble sealing. And when you're done, you should have the perfect amount of pie filling. It should come right to the top of the pan. Now, we're going to take the second half of our dough and place it right on top. To seal the edges, I use a fork and I press the fork tines into the edges. This will seal the sides so the pie doesn't leak while it bakes. You don't want to rip that crust up, but you also don't want to be too gentle or the 2 pieces of dough won't stick. When that is done, I use this adorable tiny little knife to go around the edges and trim off the extra crust. At this point, we have a sealed compartment in there, but we do need to have some vents so the steam from the filling can escape. Here is the pattern I normally use for a meat pie, and it always looks fantastic when it comes out of the oven, as well as being a handy dandy little slicing guide too. You want to put this on a baking sheet to catch any possible leaks, and then bake this at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 35 minutes. If you see the edges of your crust getting too dark for your liking, wrap a little bit of aluminum foil around the edges for the last 10 minutes and it'll keep them from getting too brown. After 35 minutes, pull it out of the oven and let it rest for about 15 minutes before you cut into it. Let me tell you, I was so worried about my pie crust, but it started flaking apart as soon as I cut into that pie. Look at this. This pie is so amazing. Nothing in the freezer section even comes close to this. And if you decide to use pre-made crust from the store and to shred up a rotisserie chicken, it also can come together in about an hour. Please let me know if you give this a try. It really is very easy to put together and it just tastes so good. And that pie crust recipe was awesome. Very flaky, very buttery, perfect for this pie. Thank you so much for watching my video this week. Here is a sneak peek of some absolutely decadent Chicago-style deep dish pizza, completely from scratch. Tune in on Wednesday for this unbeatable recipe, which is also the start of my exploration series, where we will explore different foods from all over the world and make them in my very own kitchen. I mean, of course we're going to start with pizza. Why wouldn't we start with pizza? Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you make these, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you on Wednesday.